So shining the spotlight on malaria as it remains a significant global health concern. Let's now speak to Shüné Oliver. She's a medical scientist at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. Now, malaria remains a significant global health concern, Shüné. Could you provide an overview of the current malaria situation, also highlighting specific challenges in the affected regions? Shüné, can you hear me clearly?
No, I can't. Could you please repeat the question?
I'm saying malaria remains a major concern. Give us a general overview of some of the challenges also contributing to its spread.
Certainly, that's not a problem. As you can imagine, we have had after the COVID pandemic, although after many years, we had a fairly stable numbers of malaria. We have had a problem immediately after the pandemic when numbers had increased, and this was largely due to the interruption of interventions to control malaria due to the COVID pandemic. We do not know if this problem has been sorted, because we still need to sort out the numbers, but that was one of the big problems that we have recently. We still generally have the continued problem of insecticide resistance, which is a worldwide problem. And then in general, there are a range of logistical problems when it comes to malaria. So when it comes to malaria control, this involves the logistics of applying insecticides, dealing with getting people to be correctly diagnosed with malaria in areas where people are not familiar with malaria, particularly after the COVID-19 pandemic, where the symptoms were very similar, and you could confuse the symptoms of malaria with COVID-19. So the problems that we have are not particularly new problems, but we have the general problems of the logistics of dealing with malaria, as well as the fact that insecticide resistance is a problem, and that we are not getting new insecticides to deal with mosquitoes at a particularly good pace, along with drug resistance in the parasites. So there are a range of challenges when it comes to dealing with malaria.
Shüné, early diagnosis as well as treatment are seen as being very vital in combating malaria's impact. What are the major hurdles that hinder this timely diagnosis, and how can the challenges be effectively addressed here?
In South Africa, one of the biggest problems is, as you said, early diagnosis. If you had to be in a country where the malaria cases were higher, people are, healthcare professionals would be faster to suspect, malaria. And this is not necessarily, and this doesn't seem to necessarily be in the case in South Africa, where quite frequently people have to be reminded that when there is fever, you need to think about malaria. So education is needed for people to remember that malaria is actually an endemic problem in this country, and that when there is fever, that malaria should be one of the things that you need to consider. Especially, and this is especially true when for people who do not travel. Because one of the biggest problems is when people have what is known as a distant malaria that has been malaria cases that are picked up in people that have not traveled. And people show these symptoms of malaria, but because they have not traveled, that malaria is not suspected. So basically, clinicians in South Africa need to be more aware of malaria and need to consider it as a differential diagnosis when fever is presented.
Shüné, let me thank you for your time. That's Shüné Oliver. She's from the NICD, speaking to us about efforts to mitigate against the spread of malaria.